Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Big rumours emerging today that Sergio Perez will be forced to take a pay cut by Red Bull Racing because he's performing so poorly relative to teammate Max Verstappen. Now he's 125 points behind. A clause is kicking in that reduces his salary and bonuses, it seems, but you've got to wonder whether this is just step one of a potential move by Red Bull to make a change in that second driver position. Very much intrigued to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Lots of talk on contracts lately. There's been discussions from Liam Lawson, who was at some time considered to be the favourite to replace Nick De Vries in the AlphaTauri. That's not happening. He's staying out there in Super Formula in Japan. Daniel Ricciardo is taking the seat. But we also saw the rumours yesterday that Yuki Tsunoda's contract is going to get extended. In addition to that, Perez has also been informed, or I believe there's a clause in his contract, and we'll get into more of that in a second, that says that Perez will not go back to AlphaTauri. That's not how it works. If he gets dropped by Red Bull, he's not going to go to AlphaTauri as, let's say, Albon, Gasly, these guys came up and then went back down. That's not how it's going to work anymore, especially for Perez. Pretty much AlphaTauri, the way they see it, junior drivers and Daniel Ricciardo as it stands, and guys they want to bring in to Red Bull. And if you leave Red Bull or aren't good enough to be Max Verstappen's long-term partner for the coming years, you're not going to go back to AlphaTauri or to Hugo Boss Bulls Racing, whatever they're going to call it next year. You're going to be out, or you're going to be looking for a different seat. They're not going to bring you back down to the second team. So with Liam Lawson, maybe an option there next year if Daniel Ricciardo went up to the first team, right? Because if Perez was going to be gone, Ricciardo could come in, Tsunoda would get extended. That might be Liam Lawson's way of getting a seat here. There have been some rumours about Alex Palou as well. Some interest in, well, from Helmut Marko in him for that seat. So that's another possibility. And there's also been lots of rumours around Charles Leclerc. So it's clear that Fred Vasseur really does want to lock down a solid structure there internally. And that is, let's be honest, building around a primary driver. It's happened in the Schumacher days, in the Hamilton days, in the Vettel days. Now, of course, in the Verstappen days, we have got one dominant driver at the dominant team, and that's how you have success. That is the formula. That's what people have said very recently about Alpine, saying that they don't really have a star driver to build around. Ocon, Gasly, good drivers, no real star power that they would have had if they'd kept Alonso, you could argue, but that's not what they're doing. But Fred Vasseur has that approach. He knows that you've got to build around a number one guy, and they're trying to get the deal done with Leclerc. This would be interesting for Leclerc. I think his contract ends at the end of next season. They're looking to extend it guaranteed until the end of 2026, with then an additional 3-year extension clause, which could bring him up to 2029. I know a lot of Ferrari fans or Leclerc fans are going to think, well, is this a bit risky, Leclerc? Are you sure you want to commit your career to this team? And maybe he shouldn't do that, but at the same time, how many other options are there out there, right? Maybe the Red Bull seat will open up, maybe a Mercedes seat will open up, but outside of that, it's difficult to say, and Leclerc, he might feel like his best chance is at Ferrari. They have won some races in the last season, well, last year they won a couple of races and had a potential title challenge, but it fell short at the end of the day when it really mattered. There have also been questions as to how long Helmut Marko, given he's like 80 years old, is going to stay around in the Red Bull camp, because I think Dietrich Mateschitz was tolerating him happily, but the new guy that's in there instead at Red Bull Racing apparently has a slightly different approach. Even Christian Horner says that Helmut Marko is a communication manager's worst nightmare. When Helmut goes rogue, and we've seen plenty of that and we've discussed on the channel, then you guys only have to prod him and you'll get a headline. And we've had plenty of headlines of Helmut Marko, but as Horner says, at 80 years of age, he's still looking for purple sectors. He's still watching every F3, every F2 session, following the young talent religiously. But there's been some talk as to whether Vettel could replace Helmut Marko in the coming years. But he's also given his thoughts, Helmut Marko, on the performances of Sergio Perez, and that might have something to do with this supposed clause in the contract. According to Eric Van Haren here, very close to the Verstappen and Red Bull camp, who says that Perez is doing himself a disservice with a big gap to Max Verstappen, and the team is effectively punishing him, or at least has the potential to do so, because there's a clause, now that the gap is exactly 125 points, that the salary and bonuses can be adjusted downwards. And this is the key talking point point that it's not necessarily that his contract in terms of duration is going to get ended early, although they might decide to do so. Contracts in Formula 1 are a fickle business, right? You might be contracted until 2026, but if they don't want you around anymore, they're going to get rid of you. They might have to pay you off for that period, and often they'll happily do so, as McLaren did with Daniel Ricciardo ending his contract early. But it's very clear that Perez has had a difficult season by, well, the standards he set himself. The first 4 races, split them with Max Verstappen, 1-2 each, was within, 9 or 10 points of Verstappen's lead. He got very close to Verstappen's advantage early on, and had a chance of potentially, well, people thought, oh, is he going to win the championship? Like, that was never realistic, and since then Verstappen has dominated him, right? 8 race victories now it is in a row for Max Verstappen. Perez hasn't got close. So many eliminations early, well, before Q3 even began. Monaco was an especially egregious example. Miami was embarrassing as well. Verstappen going from P9 to winning with Perez starting on pole. It's been a tough time, and he now finds himself kind of out of nowhere in a way, right? Because it wasn't many races ago, before Miami, that he was right on Verstappen's tail. Now he's 125 points behind. It's really not great. And, it's only over the last couple of races that he's extended the gap on Alonso and put some distance between himself and Hamilton. I mean, the car is so good that it justifies it, but still over 100 points down, 125 points down at the mid-season break, the summer break. It's not great, and by most people's metrics, Perez isn't performing at even a top 10 driver on the grid level right now. Over the course of the season, you guys might disagree. It's always difficult, isn't it, to determine who's doing well when you've got the car factor in play. But the rumour says that once the driver deficit gets to 125 points, now they can start reducing salary and cutting bonuses from Perez. You've got to wonder, I don't think such a contract would have existed in Verstappen's contract, just because they're not expecting Verstappen to be 125 points behind any of his teammates. But for Perez, it's interesting they set this number to say, yeah, when you're 125 points down, if you can keep within that number, well done, Checo. But it's only halfway and he hasn't. So, and I'm sure Perez won't mind too much. What he's really focusing on is trying to win some more races. I think that's kind of his goal now, is he probably realizes winning a championship isn't going to happen as much as he'd like it to, unless something went drastically wrong for Verstappen, like next season in a dominant Red Bull again, where Perez might be able to get some results, but I don't really think it's ever going to happen. And he probably knows that his best chance of cementing some legacy in F1 is to try and win as many races in the Red Bull as he can. The money maybe doesn't matter that much, but it's some indication from Red Bull, right, that they tried to have an incentive to keep Perez close to Max. That's not happening, and they might see that as a decisive point, Red Bull, where they say, you know what, if he's 125 points down, especially at the mid-mark of the season, that might indicate that making a change there is necessary. Now, we thought this last year, right? And I said before that if Max is P1 and it's Hamilton P2, Russell P3, Leclerc, Sainz, Norris, whoever in the mix and Perez is P6, then Max has a harder time on his hands defending. Max is so good, the car is so good, that it doesn't matter. Max is winning the championships on his own right now. They don't even need Perez to win both of them. And I thought that this year was going to be different to last year in that they would need Perez to perform better to win both. Turns out they don't. So maybe they think, well, we'll give Perez until the end of his deal. It doesn't matter. We're going to win the championships anyway. Next year's car is apparently going to be ridiculously good anyway, but that's the current rumor, right? So, I mean, look, it's going to be better than this year's car, and you'd wonder how that's even possible, but it's probably going to be the RB20. Verstappen is also beating Perez across all sessions so far this year, 20-4. Maybe not a massive surprise, but I mean, Hamilton's 16-8 on Russell, which is very impressive. Norris is 19-5 on Piastri, but Verstappen 20-4 against Perez. I mean, the worst is Albon Sargent at 22-1. I think Sargent got him in one qualifying session, but apart from that, he hasn't. And there's obviously a few others that are pretty interesting here on this list. But still, you've only 4 times you've got the better of him over 24 attempts. It's not great. And even we look at these are very at times biased or not particularly well done. These are the power rankings that Formula 1 do for the season, and you'll find that on average of the ratings, there's no Perez to be found. This is the top 10 theoretical best drivers, and there's always some car influence here, but generally this isn't too bad. Like, Verstappen's obviously clearly number 1. Fernando and Lewis are clearly 2 and 3 in some order or another. You could put Lewis above, you could put Fernando above, but I think that's clearly a top 3. Albon is probably getting a bit too much credit, I would say. I like Albon, I think he's good, but I think he does benefit somewhat from the bad teammate effect, where he has Latifi, now he has Sargent, Sargent's okay in qualifying, but in the race he's nothing special. Albon did also bin it back in, Australia, where they had decent points potentially on the table, so I think on the whole, Albon's getting a little bit overrated here. You guys might disagree. Fourth best driver on the grid seems a bit ambitious for Albon, I've got to say. Then Norris, then Russell. Russell, I don't know, has been performing at this level, really. Has he been, on average, the fifth best driver on the grid, roughly? I'm not convinced. Then Leclerc, Piastri, Gasly and Ocon here, actually, next to each other as well. There's always some car benefits, right? Because I would say that Yuki Tsunoda has been a top 10 driver on the grid this season, but he isn't seeing any of that here, and that's probably because he drives an AlphaTauri or an Alpha Tractor, or whatever you guys want to call it. So, yeah, anyway, just to note that Perez is nowhere near the top 10 discussion based on average rankings on the season so far, and these are the type of questions that Red Bull, as you know, we know how ruthless Red Bull are, especially in their recent treatment with Nick de Vries. They might do the same thing for Perez if they feel like Ricciardo is going to be the man, if they feel like Tsunoda's going to be the man, or another candidate they might want to bring it alongside Max Verstappen, especially because of what Ricciardo did previously. And they also probably have to wonder, how competitive is next season going to be? Do Red Bull think they're going to have another monster machine that's going to win everything in Verstappen's hands? Or do they think, you know what, Mercedes are going to be closer, Ferrari are going to be closer? And if our second driver next year is further than 125 points behind Max, we're going to be in a real difficult position and not win the championship, then they might decide to make the move. So this could be a bit of a, a line in the sands that says to Red Bull, you know what, this is potentially the kind of cutoff point where a driver is or is not cutting the mustard as to whether they're going to be able to continue in that seat for next season. Now, he's contracted until the end of next season, but we know how Red Bull and these teams can sometimes operate. So very much intrigued to your perspective in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.